And there we go. All right, on your note card, sine of x, negative x equals sine of x, and cosine of negative x equals cosine of x. And you're going, where in the Sam heck did Mr. Bierschbach pull that out of? Well, I'm going to do the cosine one first, so it kind of starts making sense, and then I'm going to do the sine one, so then hopefully it all makes sense. All right, so we had pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi, back in chapter 2 when we were doing these. So, if I take and graph the cosine of x curve, that started at 0, 1, pi over 2, 0, pi negative 1, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. It looked like this. Remember that from chapter 2. Okay? Just a little jog the memory banks. What did I say about these graphs? They keep going in the same pattern, right? So this would continue down to here and keep going this way. This one would continue down here and keep going like this, right? Okay, so let's look at some things. What's the cosine of 0 radians? That's 1 up here, right? Okay. What's the cosine of pi over 2 radians? That equals 0. What about the cosine of negative pi over 2? That's also 0. So the cosine of pi over 2, the positive one, is the same as the cosine of the negative one. What's the cosine at pi equal to? Right here. Negative 1. Back over here, what's the cosine of negative pi? Well, that's also equal to negative 1. So they're the mirror image across the y-axis. Everything's a mirror image. Okay? So whatever the positive one is, the negative one is always going to be the same. That's why the cosine of negative x is going to equal the cosine of positive x. Okay? Knowing that, let's look at the sine one. All right, the sine curve starts out at 0, 0. Pi over 2, 1. Pi 0. 3 pi over 2, negative 1. 2 pi 0. You remember that from chapter 2. Okay? So if we remember that from chapter 2, we remember that it keeps going in the same pattern. Okay? So, the sine of 0 is equal to 0. The sine of pi over 2 is equal to 1. The sine of negative pi over 2 is equal to negative 1. Pi over 2, 1. Negative pi over 2, negative 1. The sine of pi is 0. The sine of negative pi is 0. Okay? So 0 and 0. So when I go this way, then it's going to be the opposite sign this way. So if I go this way to 3 pi over 2, I'm at negative 1. So 3 pi over 2 this way will be at a positive 1. So the sign of a negative number is the opposite of the sign of the positive number. So the sine of pi over 2 is 1. So then the negative of that is the sine of negative pi over 2. Okay? So that's how it works with these. Okay? So you go with those basic two functions, and then all the other functions go off of that, because remember, the secant function just goes like that. So whatever this is. Whatever this is, that would be over here, and so on. The cosecant just flips around like this, so it would be the opposite, just like this would be. And tangent is sine over cosine, and cotangent is cosine over sine, so that's where those numbers come in. So all of that you really is just for understanding where this comes from. But what we're going to do is take simple little trig functions like the sine of x, the sine of negative x, times the tangent of negative x, times the cosine of negative x, times the cotangent of negative x, and we're going to figure out what that all multiplies to be. Okay? What is all that going to multiply to be? Well, to do this, let's turn it into, let's take out the negatives first. So what's the sine of negative x? Negative sine of x. What's the tangent of negative x? Negative tangent of x. What's the cosine of negative x? Positive cosine of x. And what's the cotangent of negative x? Negative cotangent of x. So we have a negative times a negative times a positive times a negative. If I have three negative signs, what's my final answer going to come out to be? A negative. It's going to be a negative. Now, tangent. I can turn that into negative sine of x over cosine of x, correct? Cosine of x I'll leave. And cotangent of x I'll turn into negative cosine of x over sine of x. So what happens here is the cosine and the cosine cancel. The sine and the sine cancel. No, why was I? Whoa, Mr. Bierschbach, what did you do there? This cosine and this cosine cancel. There we go. And this sine cancel. So what am I left with? Well, I'm a positive times, well, I'm a negative times a negative times a positive times a negative is a negative. And I'm going to get negative sine of x cosine of x. Negative sine of x times cosine of x. That'll be my final answer there. Okay. Let's do another one. When you see this, what are you going to think? When you see two sets of parentheses like that with addition or subtraction in between, what do you think? FOIL. Okay? But before we FOIL, I have to take care of my negative inside my parenthesis first before I FOIL, because these are not the same. And I can't FOIL two things that aren't the same. So this is 1 plus the sine of x. This is 1 minus the sine of x, because the negative x on sine comes out. Okay? So then this becomes 1. Outers and inners are going to cancel, minus sine squared of x. And 1 minus sine squared is Pythagorean identity. 1 minus sine squared is cosine squared of x. Ta-da! So what happens on this one? Before I can FOIL, I have to take care of my negative sign in here. The first set of parentheses is 1 plus cosine of x. What's the second set of parentheses going to be? 1 plus cosine of x again. So if I FOIL these, 1 times 1 is 1. Outers is cosine of x. Inners is cosine of x. What's 1 cosine of x plus 1 cosine of x? 1 plus 1 is 2 cosine of x. What's cosine of x times cosine of x? Cosine squared of x. There, I FOILed. Okay? Remember FOIL. If we have like x plus 3 times x plus 5, x times x is x squared plus 3x plus 5x plus 15. So I have to add my middle two terms. So here, my middle term is cosine of x, and my other middle term is cosine of x. 1 cosine of x plus 1 cosine of x is 2 cosine of x. Cosine of negative x, let's make, let's leave it. Cosine of negative x over sine of x minus cosine of a negative x over sine of x. What's cosine of negative x? Cosine of x. What's cosine over sine minus cosine over sine? 0. Okay, so we're working with positive and negatives here. And so on page number 165, we are going to work on 27 through 38 all. Just one